On this edition of In the Gun, well, folks, only two words matter. Beat Pitt. It's time to talk about those guys. It's time to set the stage for the backyard brawl. All that and more on this edition of In the Gun.
You are now watching Believe.
ITG.
With Wes, Owen, and Jed.
I've got the best teammates in the business here, all right?
No way!
They both played the game. They both know the game. Owen is the runaway beer truck known for having some fun.
Owen Schmidt like a runaway beer truck down the sidelines.
Jed is the signal caller who is the X's and O's and the brainiac.
First of all, Jed's research is pretty impressive.
So we've combined those two skill sets.
Skills I've acquired over a very long career.
You are In the Gun.
Once you enter this family, there's no getting out.
In the Gun, episode 188 of your new favorite WVU football podcast. I'm Wes Euler with the best teammates in the business. We got the signal caller, Jed Drenning. The beer truck might be popping in here at some point. He is dancing with the stars, raising some money for charity this evening. So we will see. You might have a beer truck surprise, but you've got myself, you've got Jed Drenning, and of course this episode of ITG brought to you in part, as always, by our friends at Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform, your number one source for everything football, every stat, every matchup, live odds and spreads to bet on during the games. It's all at Bet Online, and you can get in on their $200,000 mega contests. Pick 5 games against the spread every week for your chance at weekly prizes and a share of $200K. And when the games are over, you can head to their online casino, get in on games of blackjack, poker, or over 150 slot games. So head to the website today to get in on the action. It's all at Bet Online. The game starts here. And here we go, Jed. In a weird way, it feels like kind of like it did about 365 days ago that the season starts here for WVU. Now, we all had much different expectations coming into this year, 2024, than we did in 2023. That's an important caveat to lay out there. Our expectations going into the Penn State game this year were not our expectations going into the Penn State game 54 weeks ago. But I think people also kind of understand what I'm saying. It felt like last year, okay, more than likely you're going to start 1-1. You'll go up to Penn State. You'll get their best shot. Then you'll come home. You'll lick your wounds against Duquesne, right? Season really starts week 3. We'll really start learning what kind of team we have week 3. And again, it wasn't to that extent this year. We should have played better. We should have had a better showing against Penn State. Everybody agrees with that. But similar kind of, you were an underdog week 1. Week 2, you were a massive favorite. This, to me, feels like where it really starts to get thick. This, to me, feels like you've had the first 2, if you want to say, almost kind of preseason games in a way. Jed, this is where the drama, this is where the judgment, this is where the good stuff begins.
Not to mention, win or no win last year, there's still a degree of unfinished business. I'll never forget after Garrett's injury and when he realized he was going to be on the shelf, talking to him late in the first half, and he was just beside himself. Why does it have to be this game? I'd rather miss 4 other games than this one game. And when you think about it, he's been part of this, but in a very limited way. He touched the football up in Pittsburgh 2 years ago. I thought he was going to break that, to be honest with you, but wasn't instrumental with JT Daniels as the starter. Sure. But last year, we had some big plans hopefully going into that game for Garrett, and this offense spreading its wings and finding itself as we ultimately did down the stretch or midseason. And that didn't materialize. A handful of snaps into the game, we all know what played out. And in marches Nico. More credit to Nico, stone cold off the bench to manage the football game and lead us to a win in that environment. Says so much about Nico. But now here comes Garrett, knock on wood, healthy, with an opportunity to play in the game that he so desperately wanted to play in last year or even the year before. He understands and appreciates what this means. And I think we're finding our groove in year 3 of bringing it back now, Wes. It's like I did a TV hit earlier, and I was asked, does it feel different now than it did 20 years ago when you were playing at Annual? I was like, maybe when the novelty was there after not being on the field against Pitt for over a decade.
Yeah.
2 years ago when we played in Pittsburgh, yeah, that kind of had a different vibe. But even into the second quarter of that game, once we started, the fans started in on each other, the players started in on each other. It was right back to the old Pitt WVU backyard brawl. And now I think what truly makes this series is play the game and then spend an off season either celebrating the result
Or hearing
or
about it.
suffering the result. And now we've been through both in each of the last 2 years. So now it truly feels like it's back. And there's been a lot of chatter this week in the news with, Neil at his presser. And of course, it makes so much sense to have this as an absolute mainstay on our schedule moving forward by hook or by crook. Do what you need to do. And look, people far more powerful than me would like to see that happen, which is why I'm optimistic that it could. But yeah, now that we're back in the groove of doing this on an annual basis and spend that off season either sulking or celebrating, now it feels like the old backyard brawl is back as we head into edition 3 of it being revamped and revised.
Yeah, the only thing missing is moving this sucker to Thanksgiving weekend, right? Or Thanksgiving night or Black Friday or something like that. But no, you are absolutely correct. There are few things that West Virginia and Pitt fans agree on. You said this so perfectly. I think it would have been 2 years ago. Yes, when we played that 2022 season where we played Pitt and Virginia Tech in the same year. And man, didn't that feel like old days?
Oh, yeah.
You said this so perfectly 2 years ago in kind of what was probably one of the first dozen or so episodes we ever did of this podcast. We hate Virginia Tech because they're so much like us. We hate Pitt because they're nothing like us. And
Absolutely.
But one area that we are, if we were to do that Venn diagram of the little area in the middle that Pitt and WVU fans are similar, it's that they both want this game to be played every single year. I think even more so for Pitt fans as, the years have gone on here and Penn State kind of continues to stick their nose up at Pitt and, we don't need you and we're unrivaled and that game does nothing for us. I think even more so that's made the Pitt fans kind of gravitate to, hey, it's nice to have this mutual hatred with WVU where it's like, we don't like you, you don't like us. We're close to each other. Let's play every year. Forget all the, what's the word I'm looking for? Sanctimony, right? Of like, oh, we're a better pro.
Yeah.
We this means more to you and this means more to us and we play on a different level and all these different things. It's like, no, like neither of us are in the SEC, neither of us are in the Big Ten, neither of us are probably winning a national championship anytime soon, right? But for 364 days, we think about beating the crap out of the other one. And as you mentioned too, that has really set in these last couple years. You had that first year of having to hear about it. And then you go back and you get bragging rights last year. And I can speak to this very clearly, but there's a lot of people in this rivalry, and it's what makes the best rivalries in college football the best rivalries. When you live and work and play and exist around each other. Like Notre Dame and USC is a great rivalry historically, but how many Southern California fans live in Indiana, live in South Bend, right? How many gold? I mean, I'm sure there's a decent amount of Golden Domers that live in Southern California, but it's not like Pitt and WVU where thousands and thousands of these fans live within minutes, maybe an hour, 70, 80, 90 miles of each other. The one thing that we all agree on is that, yeah, this game needs to be played, and it's damn fine to have it back here.
The players are so often recruited by both sides. Oftentimes they grow up playing against each other in high school or maybe even earlier. And that might be, Wes, and you're right. If there's a Venn diagram, that might be the only portion of it in which we truly are kindred spirits with Pitt. When they aren't on our schedule, there's no denying that there is a Pitt-sized hole on our schedule. When we're not on their schedule, there's a West Virginia-sized hole on theirs. They don't quite have the rivalry with Virginia Tech even that we would. All right. So being in the ACC with a counterpart like Virginia Tech, they don't have the rivalry with Syracuse that we did. At least that's my estimation from the outside.
It's a basketball. Pitt and Syracuse is a basketball rivalry.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So yeah, they have some quasi rivalries, and they try and force that Penn State rivalry on Penn State. Penn State doesn't want any part of it, kind of like with us, right? Penn State and West Virginia. But we belong together in that sense, and maybe that sense alone. We're kind of out as the easternmost team in a Southwestern League in the Big 12. It's hard for us to find or claim any rivalries. It's just going to be supremely difficult for us to do so because the geographical challenges. And to some extent, even though Pitt is in the highly more concentrated ACC, closer to other programs than we might be in the Big 12, that rivalry void is still not filled. So I absolutely think both sides want and need this to be played every year. It's good for so many reasons, just so many reasons. It's the health of both schools, the health of both programs, the health of college football. College football needs games like this, these old regional rivalries. We've lost so many other things with all the changes and the landscape being shifted the way it is. And hopefully, ultimately, at some point down the road, who wants to forecast it, but things will piece back together. Maybe the ACC ultimately does blow up and we have some of these old travel partners back and Pitt's now a conference game, and maybe it is back to Thanksgiving weekend 10 years from now. Who can forecast any of that? But right now, what's critical, we play them on Saturday. And after that, you want to see what you can do to be playing them every year. Yeah, it's great to have a couple blue bloods sprinkled on your schedule, whether it's Alabama or Tennessee or whoever it might be. Yeah, there's fan interest in that. But at the end of the day, if you're going to go to a model moving forward, and I know West Virginia very much wants to do this, much like the rest of our counterparts in the Big 12, if you have 3 non-league games, you want to play one P5, or now it's P4, one power conference school, one group of 5 school, and one FCS school. Well, it makes way too much sense if you have those 3 non-conference opportunities with one power conference school. Why not Pitt? So that's ultimately, I hope, what we're striving to do.
Yeah, Jed, so much, for the large faction of college football fans that love college football. And that sounds funny, right? But there are a small section of college football fans that just like football, and they tune into college when it's a big game, when it's Ohio State, Michigan, when it's Alabama, Georgia, when it's the SEC championship or it's the college football playoff, right? But the majority of college football fans love college football. And unless you're a select Big Ten school or SEC school, Saturdays in the fall don't feel the same way they used to, right? If you're like you, if you're like me, if you're somebody who grew up a Pitt fan, it's same, but it's different. It's the same church. It's a different pew, right? It's not the regional rivalries. So much of the game has changed. But that's the beauty of this Saturday, is that at 3:30 Eastern time, when that ball goes in the air for 3.5 hours, it's going to feel like 1999. It's
1989 or 79 or 69 or 59. That's exactly right.
It's going to feel like 2005 all over again. And that is what makes these great games so great. And that is certainly something that both fan bases enjoy and I think yearn for. Another thank you to our friends at Toothman Ford and our guy JR, everybody there at Team Toothman. We all know cars cost less in Grafton. Jed, what do you say we get to a break here and we'll start getting into some of these X's and O's, some of this personnel as we continue our backyard ball preview on the other side?
A lot to talk about.
More on those stinking Pitt Panthers when we return. You are in the gun. For nearly 20 years, Fortis has been the nation's leader in providing guaranteed roof performance programs for commercial buildings. Fortis offers roof performance solutions that feature extensive initial and ongoing reconditioning for commercial buildings as an alternative to traditional replacement, with long-term performance guarantees that are backed by global leader Lloyd's of London. Fortis offers a comprehensive range of roof performance management programs that provide financial security, extend the life of our customers' roofs, and make a significant impact on ROI. Fortis is currently improving performance and increasing ROI for customers at more than 4,800 locations, with more than 140 million square feet protected, including many Fortune 500 companies that have turned to Fortis to save money, gain financial certainty, and extend the life of their existing roofs. Fortis has helped customers save more than $520 million in capital roof replacement costs for an average ROI of over 250%. To learn more, visit fortis.us.com. Fortis, roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. Back in the gun here as we roll along. It's the Beat Pitt episode, the Panther preview here on ITG. And Jed, here's where I think we should start. You, rightfully so, mentioned, Garrett Green waits for his opportunity to play in a game like this. I think as many of the juniors and seniors on the roster at WVU waited, knowing that they would get a crack or two at Pitt at the end of their their career. Our buddy Zach Frazier talked to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette about that this week, how nice it was for him to get to experience that twice, once in the atmosphere up there, once in the atmosphere in Morgantown, and how that feels like such a part of history of the two teams and the two programs. You mentioned Garrett Green there, and I think that is, listen, we've discussed a lot, and by we, I mean WVU fans, Pitt fans, football media, anybody talking about this game. I'm casting a large net there. Have talked about a lot of different angles of this game, but I don't know if there's been a lot of conversation around the fact that this is something Garrett Green really looked forward to last year, was taken away from him, just plays into the game. Jed, I wear blue and gold glasses, old gold and blue glasses, different shade than those Pitt guys, okay? But to me, it does seem like so much of this game starts and ends with, can that WVU offense get back into that form that we saw them down the stretch last season when they were hitting on all cylinders and Garrett Green was playing about as good as any quarterback in the country? If we can start to get to that again, if we can get Garrett rounding back into form here in week 3, man, it's going to be, I think, very tough for that Pitt defense to consistently stop our offense for 4 quarters.
It's going to be a matchup that in some respects, when you look at the Pitt defense and you look at the personnel populating it and even some of the coaches coaching it, somewhat unrecognizable from what it was a year ago. You have 9 new starters. Charlie Partridge, longtime defensive line coach and ace recruiter, produced 4 defensive line All-Americans for Pitt. He's jetted off to the Indianapolis Colts. He's now in the NFL. That's a massive loss. It doesn't feel like a position coach loss, right? It feels like something more significant than that. When that happened in the offseason, you recognize, look, they don't grow Charlie Partridges on trees. But the philosophy remains intact. Pat Narduzzi's defense is what Pat Narduzzi is. He's an old school Big Ten defensive play caller. That's what he was back in his Michigan State days before he got the Pitt job. That's what he remains today. Almost sometimes so aggressive in the nature of what they do that they're criticized for it. I think he takes great personal offense if you're able to run the football on his defense. That's why they so consistently rank among the best in the ACC and even the best in the country. They pressure the passer very well. They're creative in doing it. They pick their shots. But those two things kind of go hand in hand. They're knocking you off script so much, knocking you backwards. That helps their rush totals. But he does not want you running the football. And what they're going to try and do, if you try and run it tackle to tackle, he tries to build a defense that he believes is very athletic and very fast. They're going to try and spill it outside to their speed. He doesn't want you going north-south on him. Now, sometimes that might play to the strengths of what we're going to try and do with the outside zone and the stretch. But it all starts with that. Philosophically, he does not want you to run the football on him. And I think if he's going to take it personally, if you don't under any circumstances, he's certainly going to take it personally if you do it in a rivalry game. I mean, trust me when I say C.J. Donaldson upset him in a major way for an entire offseason. You could kind of tell with every interview he did, just reading the posture of that program coming into Morgantown last year, you knew that they didn't want to let us run on them like we had the year before. Now, we made enough hay with 150 yards, but yards per carry, about 3 yards per rush. It was more of a rock fight. But that's what he does, and that's not going to change. Now, let's talk about what happens behind that to make that so, and talk about some of the personnel that West Virginia will be facing with these 9 new faces. He wants to play a lot of quarters coverage, 4 deep defenders. We've talked about on the show many times. The corners, deep outside quarters, theoretically the safeties, the 2 middle quarters. What they'll do is they'll route match. Like if you push 4 vertical routes at them, it basically turns into man coverage because they're going to mash that off. But also at the same time, you've heard us talk about triggering safeties to be downhill defenders against the run in a cover 4 or quarters defense. Nobody is more inclined to do that than Pat Narduzzi's Pitt defenses. They are looking for an excuse and a reason. First of all, from a pre-snap standpoint, you'll see them aligned almost at linebacker depth. They're rarely at 10 yards deep, those 2 safeties. And that's because they're looking to be box defenders at the first sign of you trying to run the football. They're looking at indicators, they're looking at keys. And if you give them any reason, they are immediately downhill. He wants 9 guys in the box. He said, look, here's why I like quarters coverage. First of all, if you throw 4 verticals at me, I got 4 defenders over top of it. But more importantly than that, in the blink of an eye, I can have 9 defenders in the box, and it's difficult for you to run on me. Now, what that means is it places some strain on his linebackers. If you're going to play that much quarters coverage, those linebackers, those outside backers, have to get to a lot of space to cover that flat area, that quick out area to their side of the defense. And a lot of times people will try and defend that. So those are the types of things that he teaches his defenders to expect and to look for. And that's a lot of space for that one backer in the middle to try and cover, which is why a lot of teams attack them with deep crossing routes. It's a lot of real estate for one backer to try and handle. So you have to give some things up. He asks his linebackers to help his safeties against the pass, and he asks his safeties to help his linebackers against the run. Now, sometimes what he'll do is, and he's creative in this sense, you got to tip your cap. What looks like press coverage out of their corners isn't always press coverage. Sometimes they'll get up in your grill and show press coverage, but it's what they call a shadow technique, when in fact they're just going to bail and run with you. And the reason he does that is to get the receiver to waste some element of movement, expecting to have to use a release technique to get off the ball when in fact they don't. Slows them down just enough to throw the pass game off rhythm. Those little things, it's like stacking pennies. We always talk about stacking pennies. So they're creative in that sense. Sometimes they get up in your grill and they do press you. Sometimes they get up in your grill and they're just going to shadow you. And you don't know which is coming and when it's coming. But here's what this comes down to. Anytime you play a Pitt defense, irrespective of who the personnel might be, you're going to have plenty of opportunities to take your shots downfield. He's going to dare you to do that. And if you can't win more balls than you lose, it's going to be a long night. You better make some contested plays on some contested throws, because you're going to have defenders all around you. They're going to play a very physical brand of football in space and otherwise, and he's going to force you to go over top. Like when you look, like I watch his clinic tape during the off season, and I outline these things and take notes on it because I'm a big geek and that's what I do. I watch different coaches giving their clinic tapes, and that's how I spend my summers as I'm sitting outside on the porch of the family just having a burger. I'm watching things like Pat Narduzzi's clinic tape from 5 years ago. Well, he'll put charts up on the board in his clinic tape, and he shows the routes that his press coverage corners face the most. And invariably, I mean, he lists 5 or 6 different seasons. It's always one route that they face 2.5 times more than any other route. That's a fade route. Now, there's a reason for that. For those listening at home, some of you might already know this if you played the game or coached the game. Oftentimes, if an offense is running a certain route combination and the corner takes inside leverage and comes up and press, you'll simply convert whatever route you were going to run. Let's say you had a curl that you were supposed to run. Well, you're not going to run a curl against a press corner. So instead, you convert to an outside release fade. So they run so much press coverage, they force a ton of conversions, a ton of route conversions. And they look at it like, look, for a college quarterback, that's a difficult pass and a difficult throw to consistently complete. I'll take my chances. I'm going to try and force you into doing that. And you know what? There are going to be times you're going to have to do that, which means you're going to have to win some of those battles. You can't make a living going over on fade routes against Pitt. You're going to have to make some hay at some point. Now, the other thing, because they're so aggressive in their fits, and I saw Cincinnati doing some of this, especially in the first half, they'll fly downhill, and even if they're slightly misaligned, if they miss a fit, there's not a safety net. So you'll turn what ordinarily against most defenses might be an 8-yard gain into a 30-yard gain, because they're all so congested and aggressive up in the box, flying downhill. So, and the other reason he likes to play quarters, he blitzes so much. People have this misconception that he's a man coverage blitz guy. No, that's not what he is. He's a zone blitz guy. Pitt runs very little blitz packages out of man coverage. They don't run a lot of man. I mean, even when you see him get in the red zone, where most teams almost automatically consistently run some form of man, he's still oftentimes in zone blitzing you. Now, his logic for doing that, and it makes sense, He's like, look, I want eyes on the quarterback. That's the guy you intercept passes from. And if I stay in zone coverage, the more guys I have playing zone, the more eyes I have on that quarterback. And that's very true. Now, you could argue that if you can pressure a guy in man coverage, then he's going to make poor decisions, and maybe that, can lead to more turnovers. But his logic is, look, I'm going to find crafty ways to get by your O-line. I'm going to bring some pressure, but I'm going to keep zone behind it. So I got a ton of eyes with opportunities for turnovers. And that too makes a lot of sense to me. So when you look at their personnel, couple things we want to talk about. First of all, if you look at their D line, as you might expect from a Pitt defensive line, we just talked about all the All-Americans that they've even recently have. Okay. You don't have to go to some of the studs that they produced at the pro level, and Aaron Donaldson and on the line. Even recently, they produced All-American caliber bodies, whether it's on the edge or on the interior. And the one that jumps out to me, Wes, this kid named Naki Johnson, he's number 4. When you're watching tape, it's like he has his own clock. I mean, he does such a great job. Like, you were down in Atlanta when TJ Watt got flagged for jumping when he didn't jump. This kid has some of that in it. He's playing on the defensive interior. Imagine being a guard or a center. And this guy is almost in your face before the ball is all the way up out of the center's hand on the snap. I mean, he reads it that quickly. He's so much quicker than the rest of the O-line and the D-line. He just jumps out on tape. So number 4, Naki Johnson, is a guy to keep an eye on. So when we think in terms of Jaquay Hubbard at guard, Brandon Yates at center, Tomas Rimac at guard, more often than not, they'll be the ones tangling with him. So he's a handful. If you go to their linebacker group, Brandon George is a player, number 30. Kyle Lewis is a player. But they've got a kid named Rashid Byler, I believe is his name. I know he's number 31, but he's not even necessarily a starter per se, but they put him in situationally, and he's a heck of a football player. So what they'll do, Wes, is they run a lot of concepts and a lot of schemes that some of it's very simple, and they just do a great job of isolating larger, more athletic defenders on smaller, like, backs. They'll fan out and get your tackle to force on that edge, or sometimes they'll pinch down. They have so many free runners. You're like, how'd that happen? So I have to rewind the tape and watch it. It didn't look that complex, but you're watching. What they'll do is they'll pinch inside. Next thing you know, here comes the wide edge rusher. Nobody touched him. They have a free runner. Or sometimes they'll force the tackle to fan out. Here comes a backer through B gap, untouched. I mean, you'll see a lot of that. And here are some interesting numbers that I looked at. When you break down their first 2 games, again, he's a blitz-heavy defensive guy. That's what he's been. But remember, they're playing a lot of zone coverage behind it. So I want to talk about Pitt's blitz numbers, and then I want to talk about Garrett Green against the blitz. And that's why this makes for such an intriguing matchup. First couple bullet points. Through 2 games, Pitt has 6 sacks. 5 of those 6 sacks have come on blitzes. They have 40 pressures in 2 games. Here's how their pressures break down. Linebackers have 19. Their edge guys have 12. Defensive interior 5. Their corners have 3. Safety's only 1. So it tells you they're getting a lot of guys involved with that movement and that trickeration and those different looks and those different facades. So a lot to handle. They lead the nation in sacks from a 6-man rush. So again, remember, they have 4 down defensive linemen, 2 interior and 2 edge guys. So usually that's the 2 backers or 2 of the 3 backers coming behind them. Sometimes they get a little more creative than that. Maybe it's a corner, maybe it's somebody else. But from a 6-man rush, 5 of their 6 sacks have come from when they bring 6, a true blitz. When you have 4 down, 5 guys a blitz, but they'll bring 6 very often and in great situations. I mean, I see him in the red zone. I see him sometimes on 3rd down, not always, but he picks his spots. No other team in the country has more than 2 sacks from 6-man pressure. They have 5. And finally, they lead the nation in quarterback hits from a 6-man pressure with 11. Nobody in the country has more than 5 outside of Pitt. So that's what you can expect. He's going to pick his spots. They'll consistently bring 5. But when they bring 6, the looks are a real handful, even sometimes as basic as they might be. Now, look back to what they did against Bowling Green. Look back to what they did against Cincinnati, and then we'll combine the 2. Against Bowling Green,
You mean
Bowling
Kent
Green
State?
quarterback dropped back 33 times.
You mean Kent
Okay.
State?
Oh, Kent State. Yeah, I'm sorry. Kent State. I'm watching too much tape here. Kent State quarterback dropped back 33 times. Pitt blitzed on 19 of those 33 dropbacks. 58% of the time they were throwing the football, they were blitzed. Now, against the blitz, Pitt was very productive. That kid only completed 47% of his passes, no touchdowns, 1 pick. When not blitzed, the kid had 2 touchdown passes, no picks. So once again, Narduzzi would love to do this every snap, but he knows he can't. So he's going to pick his spots. But trust me when I say, you get to developing a rhythm and moving the football offensively, you'll start to see more of it. He will. Him and Randy Bates will get a little bit impatient. That's his defensive play caller. They'll get a little bit impatient and they'll dial more of it up. That's their answer to problems. Cincinnati dropped back 43 times. They were blitzed 60% of those dropbacks. Now, interesting here, boom or bust, and that's often what you're going to see against these Pitt blitz packages. It's deep shot opportunities, but those are tough to complete. But when you do, your band's going to be playing. And when you don't, maybe their band's going to be playing. Something big's probably going to happen on these blitz plays. So against Cincinnati, he was 9 for 23 against the blitz, which is only 39%. But those 9 completions, 136 yards and all 3 touchdown passes he had. Now, what's interesting, when Pitt didn't blitz, this is why Narduzzi started to dial that up a little bit more. He was 13 of 15 when they didn't blitz. 87%. 162 yards, very productive. That was a lot of the first half when Cincinnati was developing that lead. And as the game wore on, Pitt started taking more and more of those chances, okay? They took some of those chances on those busted plays for those touchdowns in the first half, but it was a mixed bag. So that's what you got against Cincinnati. So if you look at the 2 games combined, against the blitz opposing quarterbacks, 42%, 214 yards, 3 touchdowns, 1 pick. When Pitt doesn't blitz, 69%, 267 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. So they've been really productive, a combination of Kent and Cincinnati when Pitt didn't blitz, but also made some splash plays when they did. There was a big play Kent had that was called back by penalty, a long yardage touchdown too, that doesn't show up in the stats here. Now let's look at Garrett. Here's what's interesting about Garrett. You want to talk about how he's changed since last year? I'll give you a metric here in a minute to measure that. So far this year, when Garrett has been blitzed, a combination of Albany and Penn State, okay, he has 56 dropbacks in those 2 games total. He was blitzed on 20 of those 56, 44% of the time. Against the blitz, he's 61%, 183 yards, 2 touchdowns, no picks. He was productive against the blitz last year, but it was boom or bust. He was a 50% passer, but a lot of big plays. Only 1 turnover. He's been very effective for a while against the blitz. Here's one fundamental difference. There's a metric called time to throw. In other words, how long from the time the ball snapped to the time it leaves his hand. Last year, his time to throw versus the blitz, 2.73 seconds. Okay? Earmark that. This year, his time to throw in blitz, not 2.73, it's down to 2.44. He's that much more decisive and comfortable in terms of what he's seeing. These are things that bode well when you're about to face a Pitt defense that likes to dial up the pressure they do, so long as your wideouts pitch in and contribute and make those contested catches that are necessary that we're talking about. Now, when Garrett's not blitzed, he's 64%, a little over 200 yards, 1 touchdown, no picks. So that's what it looks like. Pitt likes to blitz. Garrett has been effective against the blitz. But again, normally when you're seeing blitz, you're seeing more man coverage than what you're going to see against Pitt. So there is one dimension to Garrett's game that we need to discuss here. And that, again, we go back to that quarters coverage that Narduzzi likes to talk about. He's like, another advantage of quarters coverage is you're not one high safety as a safety net if the quarterback takes off and runs. You have 2 safeties to bottle them in on each side as downhill defenders. Fair enough. Not only are there 2 safeties instead of 1, but you're in zone coverage. See, oftentimes what Garrett does to burn teams, I mean, think back to the bowl game against North Carolina. You remember when he took off clean, nobody was in 20 yards of him? They were in man coverage, and they lost contain. All your defenders on the back end have their backs turned to the ball, and they're running with the receivers. So there's a lot of open space for Garrett when that happens. But against Pitt, if you break free, they're not typically matched off in man coverage. They have their eyes on you, so they can rally to the football and make a play. And one of the other things defensively that he likes to do, and I want to get your thoughts on some of this because I've covered a lot. One of the other things that he likes to do, he says they're very effective against screens because he won't typically, in the last episode we talked about our backers dropping to landmarks. He has his backers do a lot of reading, and what they'll do is kind of drop just enough to park at about 5 yards and read and react because they want to react up and smother any screens or perimeter screens or bubbles or things like that. So that's another reason they need safety help behind them. And those safeties are playing at such a shallow depth. So these are all things that kind of make what he does unique. It's a bit of a different animal. It's really old school. It's unusual to see.
Yeah,
There's a lot
it
of
is.
quarters coverage and a lot of quarters play callers in college football today. There's still a lot of teams playing quarters, but I don't know if there's still as many teams or many teams at all playing quarters that are as downhill aggressive by their nature or their posture as what Narduzzi is. I mean, he's very downhill and he wants to play this thing in a phone booth. So if you can make the most of those shots to loosen them up, a lot can happen. And for that matter, if you can make the most of a missed run fit, but it's going to have to start right at the point of attack from Brandon Yates working out. They will be tested. I mean, I do see them do some creative things to confuse the center, confuse the tackles, sometimes confuse the backs. I mean, that's some of what you're going to see, but I want to get your thoughts before we break down a little more personnel and wrap up the defensive side.
Yeah, well, that's a whole lot to chew on there, signal caller. But yes, you are. I mean, listen, Pat Narduzzi and his Pitt teams, it's like playing Mike Gundy in an Oklahoma State team. It's like playing Kirk Ferentz in that Iowa team. I mean, these are guys that have been at the helms of their programs for a long time, and they have done things the same way, consistency. So you're right. I mean, Narduzzi has a way that he plays defense. He has a way that he molds that team around stopping the run and running the football, which I'm sure we'll get to here at some point. It's part of the reason why, if you look at it, you talk about the press man nature and just the amount of man-to-man that their corners are asked to play. I think that's part of the reason why you look over the decade that Narduzzi's been at Pitt. They've had a good amount of defensive backs drafted in that time because they play a very pro style in that regard, where there's a lot of responsibility on those guys. And that
You can recruit to it, Wes, because corners love that.
He can recruit them. He does well in developing them. And again, they play a style that those guys are already in the National Football League without a lot of adapting. So yeah, again, there's no mystery there, but it can still be a challenge because, as you mentioned, a lot of the ways that you can go about trying to win matchups against a defense like that, it's challenging for your quarterback, it's challenging for your offensive line, and that's gonna, I think, kind of be a big part of the game within the game.
I want to talk about their safeties. Is anybody in the waiting room? Is Big O in the waiting room? He was just texting me.
I don't think so. Nope, I don't see him here.
He was trying to sign in there again. He's at the dance-a-thon playing Arthur Fonzarelli dancing for the 24 hours straight. But he wanted to be a part of this. We wanted to get him in. Sky, if you're listening, which I know you are, let me see. I think we sent him the link. So, all right. Well, I just texted him back. But in the meantime, when you look again, they lost most of their defense. They were hit hard by the portal, the front seven especially. But they do have two safeties returning. A lot of experience on the back end. They're long in the tooth at those two safety spots. And they've got Javon McIntyre. I kind of regard him number two, covers space, physical, downhill dimension to him, but he also holds his own against the pass. He's a complete safety. I think he's an NFL guy. I really do. I mean, I don't see a lot of holes in his game when I watch tape, and we've seen a lot of him. And then you're going to look at Donovan McMillan, and that name should be somewhat familiar to Mountaineer fans that were at the Backyard Brawl last year because you heard his name on the PA system 18 times last year. He made 18 tackles last year. Now, what I see from him, he is an incredibly gifted tackler in space. He really is. He has that knack. So I'm not surprised by the fact that when we had to shrink and really take the game plan from what it was going to be with Garrett to Nico playing the backup role, we shrunk the game plan. So an opportunity for a safety like that to play downhill and be physical, that's why he had 18 tackles. But Wes, he's a liability in coverage sometimes. I don't see him diagnosing route combinations really effectively. Sometimes you're like, how did you not kind of see that combination coming? A couple times in the red zone, it's against Cincinnati that happened. But Donovan McMillan, number 3, I would expect us to try and attack him through the air, but he's a downhill force in the run game. And we have Owen. Owen has arrived.
Hanging out at the Chick-fil-A there.
Hanging out at Chick-fil-A, Jed, ready to rock Pitt this weekend, baby.
He's going to go get an ad package in the hand of the manager over there. That's, I'm
about to get 10,000 chicken vaginas.
Vagitas.
Where are you in Chick-fil-A? Which Chick? You in Beckley? Where are you?
Beckley.
Okay.
Yep, Beckley, West Virginia. Just finished up my Dancing with the Stars routine. I wish we would have got a little footage for you. We'll get some next week, so you guys can spin that on the pod.
Look at it.
Were you dancing on the stars just like CJ Donaldson and Jaheim White are gonna be dancing all over the Panthers?
That's the plan. That's the plan. I got a nice booty pop in the segment for you.
There we go. There we
go.
Oh,
okay. Okay. We've been clamoring for that, right? So,
yes.
So Owen, we just talked about from a matchup standpoint, our offense, their defense. Hit on Pitt's defense, West Virginia's offense. What do you think it takes? And real quickly, because I don't know how much time you have in front of Chick-fil-A there, but think back to the Brawl and just the environment, the vibe, the lead up. What made it different? What made it special, if anything at all? I mean, what was it like as a guy who has been through a handful of these?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brawl Week was always different. There was always more hype, obviously, because, Coach Rod and his staff, they were great at really bringing back the tradition and showing us clips of past games and scores and mentioning, even guys, former players and present players that had played in that game who had made big plays for victories. But, I'm going to go old school here. As far as offensively, what we need to do, we got to dominate the line of scrimmage. And like what Wes just added to, CJ and Jaheim, they got to have a heyday. Now, if you do remember, Pat White and Steve Slayton had a heyday up there, and I believe that was in 2000. Was it 6?
Yep.
2006 when we played there. I was actually on the men. I played a little bit of that game, but I had a pretty bad high ankle sprain with a heel bruise. But one of the biggest games that we had offensively on the ground between those two, that dynamic duo, and hopefully this Saturday, number 1 and number 4 and number 6 get it done.
I completely concur. Jed, I think we go to a commercial break here, reset personnel on the other side, get some final thoughts from Big O. That sound good to everybody?
It does.
Let's do it. Before we go to another commercial break, a thank you to our friends at Fortis and our buddy Rick Lewis for roof performance and financial certainty guaranteed. You got to visit fortis.us.com. We'll spin the block, look at the WVU defense, the Pitt offense when we return on the other side. You are in the gun.
Nobody supports the blue and gold Mountaineers like Toothman Ford. With over 20 NIL deals and counting, Toothman Ford continues to rally behind our student athletes. And it's time we rally and support the dealer that supports the Mountaineers. Not only does Toothman Ford offer the best prices in the state on pre-owned, their never over MSRP campaign on new Fords guaranteed to save you thousands. Drive with pride all season long, knowing you're supporting the dealer that fuels our Mountaineers. Toothman Ford, where cars cost less, in Grafton and at toothmanford.com.
Back in the gun as we roll along on our Pitt preview, our Beat Pitt episode here of ITG, and our dancing star beer trucking extraordinaire. He's got to get back to some fatherly duties here. All right, that Chick-fil-A, it's going to get cold here. We don't want to keep the kids waiting. So Big O, final kind of preview portion of this preview here, focusing on WVU's defense against Pitt's offense. It's obviously a very new kind of brand, a new look Pitt offense, pardon me, is what I'm trying to say there. Just before we let you go, a couple thoughts on what it's going to take for the Mountaineers to be successful on the defensive side of the football Saturday afternoon.
Well, Wes, the kids get Chick-fil-A, the big dog gets steak, all right? I'm now getting my steak from Logan's here real quick right before we head back to the house.
New segment, new view.
New segment, new view.
Placement.
Look, little un-Narduzzi-esque, like you guys mentioned in the commercial break there. a little more up tempo by the stinking Pitt Panthers. But as far as defense goes, hey, I'm going to go with another one. This is going to be a nail biter. Getting a shout out from the kids over here. This is going to be another nail biter here in Pittsburgh. And look, Ye, who dominates line of scrimmage, is gonna beat this one. So a big up front. Let's get that new coordinator thinking a little bit. Let's get some pressures in there. Let's throw a lot of sauce at them. You know what I mean? We were kind of vanilla last week. Let's make sure we make those adjustments in the secondary. Have a big game out of the linebackers, which we do need. And let's go get this dub, son. Let's go get this dub, baby.
I love it. I love it. I love it, Big O. I love it. Hopefully I'll see you this weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.
Yes, sir. Hey, I'll let you guys know how the steak is. All right. Love you, brothers.
See you, Big O.
Later, guys.
We'll see you.
There he goes. Duty calls. Good stuff there from the beer truck, from the Chick-fil-A / Logan's in Beckley there. Big Dog needs some steak.
Remember,
Jed,
if you're at Charles Wesley Godwin's concert Friday night, you might just bump into the beer truck.
I mean, I know everybody wants to see me there, okay, but you might see Owen as well. You might see Owen as well. I mean, I know I'm the real attraction, but you might see Owen.
We did see you signing autographs in Atlanta. Come on, right?
That's right. I mean, nobody was there for Craig Wolfley. They were there for me, obviously. That's exactly right. When we were down there at that Steelers party in Atlanta, I did sign a couple terrible towels. I tell you what, I think my head was so big by the time I walked out of there, they had to double the door size for me to walk out of the restaurant. But, Jed, all right, we're not talking about the team that plays at Acrisure that's actually good. We're talking about these stinking Pitt Panthers. And as Owen alluded to there, while this might be your grandfather's Pat Narduzzi defense, this ain't your grandfather's Pat Narduzzi offense.
It's not at all. And it's, you could argue, and I've read this, that 3 poor decisions by Pat Narduzzi knocked them off track from what they were as the team that kind of unseated Clemson from their position in the empire that Dabo had running. Those decisions were, you lost Mark Whipple as your OC. I'm using air quotes if you're listening and not watching on YouTube. Lost Mark Whipple, who was your record-setting offensive coordinator with Kenny Pickett when they did all those wonderful things offensively. And you replaced him with a more pro-style, grounded and pounded Frank Signetti, which was much more in keeping with the style that Narduzzi wanted. As the old school defensive play caller, he wanted a guy who was going to play field position, chew clock. So that's what he went with. And then he, 2 years in a row, reached into the portal for a replacement that he considered the heir apparent to Kenny Pickett, and neither time did it really work out. One from all the way out on the West Coast, a USC transfer, the other one a Boston College transfer that was a local Pittsburgh kid. And neither one of those worked out. Neither one of those quarterbacks, both backfired. Now, some have argued there really wasn't much of a quarterback battle for either of those two. They were both kind of anointed. And that's why ultimately they lost their jobs. And Pitt even did somewhat better with the kids that were playing behind them late in the season. He almost kind of sort of did the same thing in the spring. Did you notice that with Nate Yarnell? I mean, he named him as the clear-cut starter in the spring, and then he gets, and this is where we need to start the real conversation. Eli Holstein is their quarterback. The transfer from Alabama was a very highly coveted recruit when he came out a couple years ago. He came out of Louisiana. He was a top 5 quarterback by ESPN standards in that class. Big kid, 6'3", 230-plus pounds. So he brought him in as his new quarterback, or at least to compete for it. He won the job. I think decisively won the job. He certainly has now. But the true story in Pittsburgh has been the addition of new 30-year-old coordinator, Cade Bell. Cade Bell, if you're my age, you know the name Kerwin Bell. You probably have no idea who that is, but he's a Florida quarterback from the 1980s, former SEC Offensive Player of the Year. Spent a lot of time playing pro ball in the CFL and in the NFL. Played for Lindy and Fonnie, backed up Dan Marino, backed up Jim Harbaugh. Even coached at one point with Spurrier, Florida. So what he did when he finished his playing days, Kerwin Bell got into the coaching business and developed his own system, his own kind of pro spread system. It had elements of Lindy and Fonnie's offense, influences from what Spurrier did, influences from the motion side of things with what you see in the CFL, little mixed bag of everything. It's some cool stuff they do. Well, the next thing you know, he has his kid Cade Bell playing quarterback at Jacksonville State in Florida, and he turns into a 10,000-yard passer, and he ends up on staff with him at Valdosta. Thinks just like his dad. He thinks very aggressively. He's, identified as a creative mind very early. Becomes an instrumental part of the Valdosta staff. So when they move on to take the Western Carolina job, they set at Valdosta State West. Think about this: they set the all-time Division II scoring record for a season, all time. And then they went to Western Carolina, turned that program around. Cade Bell's offense, he handed the offense off to Cade Bell, which was a big thing for Kerwin Bell. He said, look, I wouldn't trust it with just anybody. So Cade Bell, not even 30 years old, was calling the plays at Western Carolina. They led the FCS. They led the nation in total offense. So he was recognized in coaching circles as definitely an up-and-comer, a young, talented offensive mind. If you pay attention to that kind of thing, which I do, he was a name that was familiar to us. His schemes were somewhat familiar in the coaching circles. So it was a bold hire for Narduzzi to go so far against the grain from what we've always seen him do, and we know what he's comfortable with. I mean, the past couple of years, Pitt has struggled with time of possession because they couldn't get out of their own way. But now, they're not going to have time of possession by choice and by design. He is fast tempo, up tempo, and through the first couple games outside of a couple spurts, it looks like Narduzzi has, by and large, with a couple exceptions, let him do his thing, let his young coordinator call it. And of course, as a defensive play caller, which Pat Narduzzi is through and through, what that means is ultimately you're going to end up on the field defending more snaps. Now, they haven't really seen that yet, but Pitt's offensive snaps have seen a major uptick. Against West Virginia last year, they only ran 56 plays. For the year, they ran 60. They're already in the mid-70s. So at some point, that means you're going to be defending more snaps, but not quite yet.
Sure.
Because Pitt has been, for the most part, again, outside of some spurts in the first half against Cincinnati in rhythm offensively, as long as you've heard Neil talk about this, as long as you're getting first downs, you can use a tempo offense and not really hurt your defense. But as soon as you force an offense like that into a couple quick 3-and-outs, that's a whole different animal. So Cade Bell's a big story. Eli Holstein's a big story. Here in a minute, we're going to break down some numbers on him. But from a personnel standpoint, let's talk a little more. They got both their tackles back. They've got their center back. They had off-season battles for their guard positions. So that's kind of what they've got at the point of attack. Bartholomew, one of the better tight ends in the ACC, so they can get creative with him. And that's one of the things I noticed when I started watching their tape. Cade Bell does do creative things to get the ball in space in his playmakers' hands. Like you'll see them motion out of a set and run a tight end around just to get Bartholomew a touch, and he picks up a first down. It's pretty sweet stuff that they run. But again, they combine tempo with it. So they're going to try and put you in space. They're going to get wide splits with their receivers. Think back to when Art Briles was at Baylor.
Yeah.
And that version of the air raid. What Art Briles would do is he would set his receivers out so far that he was going to force your secondary to declare, I'm either a pass defender or a run defender. I can't be both. And that's to some extent what you see with these pit alignments with Cade Bell's offense. So that's kind of been fun to watch. Now, from a targeting standpoint, we're going to get into some of his pass catchers and receivers, but what has been a massive, massive addition to this Pitt offense, you had their feature back and Rodney Hammond lost a couple weeks ago. We were texting on the thread about it. Yeah. I thought they'd have a major downturn, but they didn't. They got Desmond Reed, which we talked about Cade Bell, the offensive coordinator coming from Western Carolina. Well, Desmond Reed was an FCS All-American running back at Western Carolina that transferred from Western Carolina and came in with Cade Bell. So now he's Pitt's starting running back. And Wes, right now, he leads the country in all-purpose yards at 244 a game. He leads Power 4 in yards from scrimmage at 205 a game. He's running the football. He's explosive. They use him in the pass game. They target him. He's a special teams weapon. He's already made big splash plays in the transition units. He's a handful. He's about the height of, when you look at Jaheim, I think he's like a thinner version of Jaheim. I mean, you heard Jordan Leslie mention Deuce Vaughn in comparison this, and I can see that. I can see that. He's tough to find. He's tough to spot because he's so short, like Jaheim is, but he's about 20 pounds lighter than Jaheim. So once again, if you can isolate him in pass protection, you can exploit some things. But he's a weapon. He's a true weapon. Now, when they throw the football, which they now love to do with this new system and Eli Holstein, here's who they're targeting the most. You've got a battle-tested veteran in Kanata Mumfield, West Virginia.
Yeah,
Seen him the last couple of years. Yeah, he's a good player. And here's the one thing that I see as a parallel throughout this group. When you hear Kerwin Bell, Cade Bell's dad, talk about the type of players that they try and get to populate the receiver group in this offense, he's like, look, we're not an offense that goes after these tall, rangy players. We like more compact kids with shifty hips that can get in and out of quick route cuts. And when you look at Pitt, that's what I kind of see. Part of it he inherited, part of it he brought with him, or part of it they brought in. Here's the size of these Pitt receivers: 6'1", 6'1", 5'11", 5'10". So West Virginia has more height on the perimeter. That's not really what Pitt within the scheme is after. But Kanata Mumfield's a weapon. Kenny Johnson, number 2, is a weapon. He's a guy that's making some plays for him. And then you got this Sincere Lee kid. I'm not making that name up, by the way. He came from Western Carolina as well. He's automatically on the all-name team. You'll see him be part of it, and then Raphael Williams will be part of it. But they spread the football around, they isolate you, and they do some pretty creative things in terms of trying to put the defense in position of conflict and isolate you. So this is what's keeping me up at night. I can't imagine being the staff. We spent most of the last show talking about the defensive struggles on the back end for West Virginia the first 2 weeks of the season. This is not a good time to be trying to bandage those shortcomings or those wounds against this Pitt offense. If this was last year's Pitt offense, last year's Pitt offensive style or pedigree, I might feel differently. But this is an offense tailor-made and built to try and exploit any shortcomings they might see. So you better be ready, because it's going to be all hands on deck. You're going to have to get some pressure on this kid. Again, we'll talk about some of these numbers in a minute. But at the same time, you're going to have to demonstrate some patience and hold up in coverage. So defensively, you better fix some things right away. You better find those landmarks that the backers struggle to find against Albany. Or you better make those 50-50 plays that the corners struggle to make against Albany. So that's kind of what you're looking at. And something that I think is interesting to keep an eye on, Wes. We have, look, for the better part of the last 2 seasons, if you look at the Penn State game, Eddie V was lost early in the Albany game. If you look at the Penn State game, then all of last year, Eddie V is a guy who was giving us about 40 snaps a game on that defensive front. Now, bear in mind, even when you're counting Eddie V, we were only really going 6 deep without tapping into some of those freshmen. It's not the depth of the group that we had last year. So first of all, with Eddie V on the shelf for the indefinite future, we'll see how long. He's not going to play against Pitt. First thing you have to do is gobble up those 40 snaps from somebody else. And then you have to spread the wealth and find what kind of rotation you're going to settle on. Now, what I did notice against Albany, Nate Gabriel, the freshman, played 24 snaps. Eli Kinsler played 18 snaps. I mean, kids like that are going to have to contribute. Otherwise, you don't have enough bodies. Here is why I find this interesting and somewhat concerning or alarming. A.J. Jackson has always demonstrated the ability to find that sweet spot in terms of hitting just the right snap count with each of these kids, with each of these pieces on this defensive line. Well, when you typically see higher snap counts with some of these kids than you're comfortable with, if you look over the course of Sean Martin's career or Eddie V's when he was healthy, when you're playing Texas Tech, when you're playing TCU, why? You can't pick and choose your spots to substitute. When you face tempo offenses, it's much more difficult to substitute to the extent or the degree that you want to. So you're going to have to be on high alert any opportunity you get, anytime you see Pitt substitute, that gives you the opportunity to, anytime they pump the brakes. So it's really going to test A.J. Jackson's ability to get these bodies in and out, because you're going to have limited opportunities at the same time that you lost Eddie V, and you haven't really settled on this new rotation and what it might look like under ordinary circumstances, much less these hectic, chaotic circumstances against a team that's going to try and rip off 75-plus plays a game. So that is definitely something that you want to pay attention to. General thoughts before we dive into some numbers on Eli Holstein. I gave you, once again, a lot to chew on there.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so much unknown with this Pitt offense. The 2-game sample size is there, but Eli Holstein wasn't the only guy in the Kent State game. They were still trying to go back and forth between him and Yarnell. And then Eli Holstein played bad for 40 minutes against Cincinnati and then great for 20 minutes. Like, it's just very hard for me. There is no doubt that the Pitt offense looks much better, much more worrisome than it did 2 weeks ago before the season started. But I also don't know how much stock to put into what we've seen from them in 120 minutes of football when Kent State is the worst MAC team and just lost to St. Francis, a 1AA school. And I think Cincinnati could be the 1, 2, 3 of the worst teams in the Big 12. So I just and inexplicably went to sleep with 7 minutes left in the third quarter of that game. Again, they look more dangerous. They are more dangerous. They concern you more than the middle of August if we would have been having this conversation. But there is just still so much unknown to me about this Pitt offense because I've seen the highlights, I've seen the plays, I saw the comeback. It was all the rage on the Steelers plane when we were flying down to Atlanta and that was happening. But I don't know how much stock to put into what I've seen because they have done it against two very questionable opponents. And even against Kent State, it wasn't like it clicked the whole time. If that Pitt offense only shows up for 20 minutes, I think they're really going to struggle. If that Pitt offense looks like it can for the course of 60 minutes, and we're going to be in for a ball game, and you better be ready to go.
I think it's going to be critical to try and do what Cincinnati did, except finish the job. Cincinnati did a good job of getting out in front. And again, I've watched that tape multiple times, and I'm still scratching my head over. I mean, the margin for error for Pitt became very slim and finite in the second half, and they made the plays they absolutely had to make. Cincinnati can run the football effectively. Cincinnati was making plays in the pass game. I like their new quarterback. I think if they play that game 10 times with that score, that 9.5 times Cincinnati holds on and wins.
Sure.
But Pitt did everything they absolutely had to do to come from behind and win that football game. But let's talk about Eli Holstein. Okay, overall, let's start with this. He's a 67% passer, averaging 300 and some odd yards a game, 7 touchdowns, 2 picks. He has 37 rushing yards, but again, he's been sacked some. He has run for 4 first downs on third down. That's something I always look to. Here's something that concerns me. When I watched the tape, he was more athletic than I expected him to be for a guy that size. So for a West Virginia defense that hasn't solved 2 somewhat surprisingly athletic quarterbacks, Drew Aller can move better than you give him credit for. You saw what he did to us in those third down conversions. Even last week, Burkett, somewhat athletic kid for Albany, extended some plays, gave us some problems with his feet. And now you got a guy that is tied for the ACC lead in scrambles and trying to extend plays and is athletic enough to create a few problems with his feet. Again, he's not going to gash you for 150 yards on the ground, but he can make some things happen with his feet and he can be problematic. But when you get into the passing portion of things, when you blitz him, he's a 53% passer, but he still makes some big plays. When you don't blitz him, he does like to hold on to the football. He's a 71% passer. I'm going to get into some intriguing numbers here when you break the first half and the second half apart. You talked about the sluggish start against Cincinnati and some of the disjointed nature, even though it was 28-14 at halftime against Kent. But as Phil Steele pointed out to Skylar and I, Pitt dominated that first half statistically. They just couldn't, the score didn't reflect it. But there were some holes in what they were doing offensively at portions of that game, which made you somewhat uncomfortable if you're a Pitt fan, right? Okay. Eli Holstein there's a metric called on target. We've talked about this before. Not the percentage of your passes that are caught and not the percentage of your passes that are even catchable, but on target, the percentage of your throws which are accurate and on target. His on target percentage, again, his completion percentage is 67%. His on target percentage is 64%. Okay? This is where this gets intriguing. That puts him 14th in the ACC, right behind Tell me what the story is right now down at Florida State. Their quarterback's accuracy.
DJ Ugalele needs to be applying for jobs and getting on with his life's work besides football.
Because of his accuracy issues, okay?
Yeah.
He's 13th in the ACC. Eli Holstein's on-target percentage is 14th. No other guy among those 14 ahead of him has a completion percentage higher than their on-target percentage. Think about what I'm saying. You're completing more balls than you're on target with. He's the only guy in the ACC doing that. His receivers are making plays for him. And here's what I see with him, Wes. He's absolutely a tale of two players. When he finds his rhythm and he gets comfortable, there are points in both those games when he gets humming, he is almost elite. And you see why he was a 4-star quarterback, a top 5 in that class. You see it. You see flashes of it when he's comfortable, and it's lethal. I don't want to get him there. I don't want to let him develop that level of comfort. But when he's not, he's a completely different football player. Let's break this on-target percentage down further. It takes him some time to settle in. Some guys are just like that. Again, I'm watching tape, and I don't see schematic explanations for this, things being that differently between what he's seeing in the first half versus the second half, but maybe a little more blitzing in some circumstances. But okay, here's his overall on-target rate is 64%, which is 14th in the ACC, right? In the first half, it's 55%. In the second half, it's 79%. So now think about that difference. What happens when you start watching what they're doing on tape? They play a more controlled version of extending their passing game. He's not pushing the football as deep as often in the second half, and he's finding rhythm with these intermediate type throws. He's getting his footwork squared away. His accuracy is more in line with what you would expect from a kid with that kind of pedigree. So those are the types of things that stand out. It takes him some time, or at least this is only a 2-game sample size. I mean, he might come out ready to go lights out right out of the gate. I don't know. It's only 2 games in his entire college career, right? Well, here's the other thing that stuck out at me. He seemed to be holding on to the football when given the opportunity to do so, when you weren't pressuring him. So when I see that type of thing in my notes as I'm watching tape, I dive into the metrics to see if I can find something to lend some frame of reference or support to it. Well, here's what I found. Against a 3-man rush. Now think about that defensively. West Virginia, by its very structure, is a 3-4 defense. Sometimes we'll rush 3. We usually rush 4. Not as often do we rush 5. Cody Alexander talked about, West Virginia doesn't like a lot of 5-man pressures. We're more of a 4-man pressure team. We'll do both, but against 3-man pressures, when the defense is dropping 8, Eli Holstein's completed 67% of his passes, and he pushes the football a little over 10 yards deep on his average depth of target. Here's where it gets intriguing. He's been sacked 6 times. Wes, a third of those sacks have come against 3-man pressures, which is interesting, but it gets more interesting here. His pressure rate. Now, pressure is defined as any play in which the quarterback is hurried or hit or knocked down, any play in which the defense successfully manages pressure. His pressure rate when facing 3-man pass rushes, when the defense drops 8, listen closely, 50%.
Ooh, good Lord.
50%. Wes, that's the highest in the nation by a 3-man rush by a wide margin. If you look in the Power 4, the next highest, he's 50%. The next highest is 36%. He holds on to the football and sometimes gets a little greedy with it. So what that means is you have to hold up in coverage, understanding that he'll sometimes get greedy enough to maybe force something. Think about that. You have 8 defenders splattered across those zones back there when he's doing this. And he's still holding on to the football, trying to make that happen. So I found that intriguing. Again, when you go 4-man rush, his pressure rate drops to 20%. He gets it out more on rhythm. When you go 5-man rush, about a third of the time you're going to get pressure. So when you're bringing pressure, he senses that, and he gets the football out on time. But when you're dropping numbers into coverage, his biological clock as a quarterback's a little off. And again, maybe that's something they've recognized and they're addressing. I can't stress this enough. It's only a 2-game sample size. So many things could drastically change, but those are some things that, once again, as I'm watching tape on this kid, I'm impressed by some of what he does. The good version. Remember Bo Nix? You had the good Bo and the bad Bo at Auburn. Well, through 2 games, it's kind of like the good Eli and the bad Eli, Holstein at Pitt. And the good Eli is really good. It's really good. But it takes, through 2 games, it's each time, takes him a little bit to settle in and get in a rhythm. But when he does, he's humming. He's humming. So that's kind of the long and short of what the challenge will be for this West Virginia defense, that when facing the tempo that they're going to bring to bear, you're going to have to find a rotation that's suitable. They're going to be looking. Trust me, as a play caller, I've done this. I've been there, and I've watched for it myself. You're going to have Cade Bell with eyes everywhere, watching for the first sign of fatigue on our defensive line. They're going to watch for hands on hips. They're going to watch to see if we're running on fumes at any level. It could be 6 plays into a drive. It doesn't matter. And at that point, they'll light the tempo up even further and throw kerosene on that fire. So it's going to be critical for us to find a rhythm and make the most of every single opportunity to get subs in on the defensive line. But it's also going to be critical for us. I just talked about it, Wes. We struggled last week in our linebackers appropriately dropping to their landmarks to snuff out those zones underneath. This is a dude who has demonstrated time again, he will hold the football forever looking for any hole in those zones. So you better shore that up in a big way and not give him those open spaces and opportunities that we were giving Albany, to some extent giving Penn State. You better rectify that quickly, and you better get physical on the back end, and you better be making plays when they do force the football into 50-50 situations that we have not made through 2 games. So a lot to chew on, a lot to think about, but it's a big challenge. It's a challenge that has me concerned until I see the progress or steps that we might have made. This is not a good matchup for us defensively when we're trying to shore up the things that we're trying to shore up. Not with this new look, with this new scheme, this new system, this new set of players. I'm like you. I'm not so sure what those first 2 Pitt opponents might turn out to be. But at the same time, you play who's on the schedule. And I've seen enough out of what they've done offensively to alarm me far more than what I saw in them offensively at any point in the last 2 years.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. No doubt. They have, I think, taken a step forward on that side of the football. The question is, how big of a step? Is that a little half step? Is that a tiny step? Or is that a leap? Like we're in the long jump in track and field here, and it's a few yards of a step. Then that is the great unknown at this point. And sounds like we got to jump on these pencil necks early, make them play from behind, make Eli.
Except keep on them. Keep on them. Like, I have to think, Wes, that if you 3 and outs will be critical in this game. They'll be worth their weight in gold. Because if you can steal some 3 and outs defensively, if you get a couple of those in a row, all of a sudden you got a head coach in Pat Narduzzi that he might be head coach of the whole team, but I still say he's head coach of the defense first.
Sure.
And if his defense is asked in back-to-back possessions before they even have a chance to get that fire is still burning on the sidelines. You can't even grab a cup of Gatorade before you're asked to get back out there. If that happens 2 or 3 possessions in a row, something tells me he's going to be on those headsets with Cade Bell saying, we need a couple first downs and punt. What's going on here? We need to get to the point that we're impacting their communication, their approach, their plan. And I think you can do that probably in this game more than others if you get a couple 3 and outs and start stringing those things together with some quicker stops than they're comfortable with. That's when the tempo can look. Tempo's been part of my life for almost 35 years. Trust me when I say this. The only time you get concerned, and the only time I found myself as a quarterback watching the play clock, is when you aren't getting first downs. So yeah, keep an eye on that. So so many fascinating things about this matchup. And oh, by the way, it also on top of that, it happens to be the backyard brawl.
Oh, buddy, does it ever. It's always intriguing. It's never dull. That's for sure. A final thank you to our friends at Johnston Equipment for being a presenting sponsor of In the Gun. 0% financing for 72 months, plus a free loader on select Coyote models in stock. Visit them at their Route 33 location between Weston and Buchanan. All right, Jed, I guess that means we just got to get to one more break here and make our picks on the other side, correct?
I think that's what we're going to do. And I would close with this, Wes, from a special team standpoint. Again, they've made plays. We, through 2 games, we like where we're at with those kickoff coverage issues. Let's keep it that way. This feels like one of those games that special teams could be a factor.
Sure.
So let special teams for West Virginia maybe be the hero in this one and not the GOAT. So, I could see something like that happening. So let's make a play. Let's block a kick. Let's break a return, whatever the case might be. Because, I've watched them, and they have some playmakers in the return unit. So that's worth mentioning as we close out here.
Blocked a punt up there last time at Acrisure Stadium. Let's do it again. Final segment, we'll make our picks on the other side and get up out of here. You are in the gun.
There are better-known tractors in the world than Coyote. Ones with bigger names, longer histories, more popular hats, cute toy lines. But there's not a single tractor ever been built that's better equipped to do the dirty work. So we'll just focus on what really matters. Coyote, we dig dirt.
Get 0% financing for up to 84 months with approved credit on select Coyote tractors in stock now at Johnston Equipment. Route 33 between Weston and Buchanan.
Final few minutes here of In the Gun as we wrap this up with our weekly pick'em. A reminder, if you want to get involved, it's pinned on our Twitter page, on our X page, at In the Gun Podcast. It's real simple. It's a spreadsheet. You make 4 picks every week. Your signal caller, which offense is going to throw for the most yards. Your beer truck, run for the most yards. Offense of the week, who's going to score the most points. Defense of the week, who's going to give up the least amount of points, all within the Big 12 Conference. Obviously, for this week, Jed, you have instituted a new rule as well, too, where whoever has first place from the previous week can play God and block somebody from picking one team this week. So Skyler, since he got first last week, has banned Owen from picking the University of Central Florida.
Wouldn't you know it? Skyler didn't know at the time, but Owen had his pick in, and guess who his pick was? It was UCF.
Which is hilarious.
We've already seen the new rule take effect. So remember, if you win the week, you get to pick whoever you want and block one team. So
in light of that, go ahead.
Okay, well, yeah, first of all, let's go with Kansas. Kansas versus UNLV was Owen's backup pick. So he went with the Jayhawks to rush for the most yards against UNLV.
Him and Devin Neal. That's my favorite Valentine's Day story.
Devin Neal. That's a great matchup. Great pair. Okay, like ham and eggs. Right now, Skyler, I scared him out of BYU at Wyoming, playing up in the mountains. That's a scary place for visitors. He was going to go with BYU to score the most points. He shifted, and he picked Oklahoma State to score the most points in the Big 12 at Tulsa. You want to go or you want me to go, Wes?
You go. I'll go last.
I'm not changing anything. I'm rolling. I'm going with those Colorado Buffaloes. It's great TV. It's bad football. I'm going to say that on the road against Colorado State has struggled mightily against the pass. Of course, they opened the season at Texas. That didn't help. They've been a little better against the run. I would imagine that at some point Colorado has to try and run the football to take some of that pressure off that poor offensive line. But I'm going to say Colorado throws for the most yards once again against Colorado State, which I almost went West Virginia because of this matchup. But
so most of the time I think with my head on these. I had all intents and purposes of picking Oklahoma State. It's the biggest over-under this week in the Big 12. They're the biggest favorite. They're playing Tulsa, right? Should score a lot of points. But if you've watched this thing that we do here called In the Gun over the years, you know sometimes I throw my head out the window and I pick with my heart, particularly when it relates to the Mountaineers, particularly when it relates to a rivalry game. So you ready for this, Jed? Let's put it all out there. I think these Pitt Panthers are a little bit of a paper tiger. They're feeling great about themselves. I think they're still that 3-9 team last season. Yeah, they beat up on Kent State, who lost to St. Francis 1AA. Yeah, they went and they got a miracle comeback win against Cincinnati, who might be the worst team in the Big 12. WVU, meanwhile, it's been the opposite. Came into this season with a lot of hype, a lot of expectations, and through 120 minutes, it hasn't necessarily been there. The Mountaineers figure it out this week. The Pitt Panthers come back to reality. Give me WVU. as my Big 12 defense of the week to shut the door on those stinking Pitt Panthers. They didn't score a touchdown last year in Morgantown. They're going to score one this year at Acrisure Stadium. Less than 20 points for the Pitt Panthers, and that'll be enough for me to pick WVU.
Can I be honest?
Defense of the week. No homer.
I'm going to be honest. I like he's still on the screen with it. I considered West Virginia. I do like the matchup, but my track record would suggest it's more of a curse. So I steered clear. At least you have a pretty good history of doing this. So
there are a bunch of pencil neck dorks who are all ready to call themselves a volleyball school and pretend that they care about basketball again. Beat the hell out of Pitt and bring those paper Panthers back to reality.
With their freshly fired AD, the week of the Brawl.
I would like to solve the puzzle.
For those, again, listening and not watching, you need to check out YouTube.
We don't say bad words on this podcast very often, but eat shit.
Vanna White is directing you too. There you go. And oh, by the way, shout out to Bonnie Bell's Bakery, both in Anmore and White Oaks in the Clarksburg area. They've got your backyard brawl cookies. Check my Twitter feed if you haven't, and you'll see what I'm talking about. I upset all 6 Pitt fans with my tweet. I'm just kidding. 2 of them aren't upset, but they're pretty cool. You want to check out the cookies at Bonnie Bell's Bakery in Nutter Fort and White Oaks.
Phil Steele coming on Friday. Another week getting ready for the big slate with our boy Phil Steele. Friday night, you might see myself in the beer truck at the Charles Wesley Godwin concert. Saturday, let's go beat the hell out of Pitt. Big thanks to the beer truck for taking some time on a busy day for him dancing with the stars for charity to fit us in here. Big thanks to our guy Skyler for putting this together for us. As always, for the signal caller, Jed Drenning, I'm Wes Euler. The one thing we ask of you is to be an ear and tell an ear that we're going to beat the hell out of Pitt and that you have a new favorite WVU football podcast, and it is called In the Gun. Take care, everybody. If you're going to the game Saturday, have fun, make some noise for me. All right, this is only the second backyard brawl football game I've missed since I was 7 years old. All right? But unfortunately, work calls and I need the paycheck, okay? So I won't be there. So do me a favor and pick up the slack for your boy not being there. 2 words. Beat Pitt. You've been In the Gun.
ITG.
The fun doesn't have to stop here.
Be sure to hit subscribe and never miss an episode.
If you have any questions, suggestions, or feedback,
be sure to follow us on X at In the Gun Podcast.
Join us again next time.
Until then,
tell an ear to tell an ear about your new favorite WVU football podcast.
This mission is over. It's over.